Hey guys, tonight we're taking a relaxing trip back to ancient Rome, a place that collapsed nearly 2,000 years ago, yet somehow still runs your daily life. So before you get comfortable, take a moment, like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Standing in line feels so normal today that questioning it feels almost rebellious. You line up for coffee, you line up at airports, you line up at government offices where time goes to die. Sometimes you line up just to ask someone why the line is not moving, and yet you obey, calmly, patiently, like a well-trained Roman citizen waiting for grain, because that is exactly where this habit comes from. Ancient Romans adored order. Not fairness, not efficiency. Order. A straight line of quiet people was Rome's favourite form of crowd management. It looked disciplined, it looked civilized, and most importantly, it stopped people from stabbing each other over bread. Grain distributions were legendary. Thousands of citizens showed up, stood in line, and waited. If you arrived early, you ate. If you arrived late, Rome taught you an important lesson about personal responsibility and hunger. No exceptions, no compassion. The line did not care that your sandals broke or your child cried. The line had spoken. Romans applied this logic everywhere. Courts, public baths, temples, military pay, even executions. Yes, executions. People queued while officials processed paperwork, adjusted robes, and made sure the vibes were correct. Imagine standing there, shifting your weight, thinking, I hope this moves faster before lunch. Perfectly normal Roman behavior. The brilliance of the line was psychological. It created the illusion of fairness without actually guaranteeing it. Everyone suffered equally. And people tolerate suffering much better when it is organized. Chaos causes revolts. Lines cause resignation. Fast forward 2,000 years and nothing has changed. You still stand in line even when technology could eliminate the need entirely. Self-checkouts exist, yet lines remain. Online forms exist, yet waiting rooms persist. Why? Because the ritual matters more than the outcome. And the most Roman part of all? When someone cuts the line, people do not shrug. They feel moral outrage, deep, personal betrayal. Society briefly unites in silent judgment, because the line is sacred. Not the service, not the result, the line. So the next time you stand quietly behind someone for no clear reason, staring at the back of their jacket like it holds ancient wisdom, remember, you are not waiting. You are honouring a Roman social control mechanism designed to keep hungry people calm, and it is still working beautifully. If ancient Rome had a religion, it would have been paperwork. Romans did not trust memory. They did not trust verbal promises. They barely trusted each other. What they did trust was ink, wax seals, witnesses, and documents long enough to make you forget what you were agreeing to in the first place. If something was not written down, it might as well have never happened. Love faded. Loyalty shifted. But paperwork was eternal. Roman contracts governed everything. Marriage agreements, business deals, property transfers, loans, employment. Even friendships of convenience somehow involved documentation. There were contracts for selling land, renting rooms, lending money, freeing slaves, and occasionally promising not to sue someone later when you inevitably changed your mind. And these were not short documents. Roman legal language was dense, repetitive, and intentionally confusing. Not because clarity was difficult, but because complexity created authority. If you could not understand the document, that meant the system was working. Lawyers thrived. Ordinary citizens nodded politely and hoped nothing bad would happen. Fast forward 2,000 years, and here you are, clicking I agree on terms and conditions longer than most ancient epics. You have not read them. No one has read them. Somewhere deep down you know this, but you click anyway. Why? Because Rome taught us that legitimacy comes from written agreement, not comprehension. Modern contracts follow the same logic. Rent an apartment? Contract. Start a job? Contract. Cancel a subscription? Surprise contract. Even borrowing a ladder from a neighbour feels like it should involve at least 2 signatures and a witness named Marcus. The Roman obsession with written proof created a culture where protection mattered more than trust. If something went wrong, the document mattered more than intent. That belief survived perfectly. Today, it was in the contract ends arguments, friendships, and sometimes entire court cases. And the most Roman part of all? Even when contracts clearly favour one side, society treats them as sacred. You agreed. The document exists. Therefore, the outcome is fair, regardless of how absurd it is. So every time you sign something you barely understand, congratulations. You are participating in a Roman tradition designed to protect systems, not people. You are not agreeing. You are submitting. Ancient Rome did not just invent bureaucracy. It perfected it, polished it, gave it a title, and then made sure it could never be removed. The Roman Empire ran on layers of administration stacked so high that even the administrators sometimes forgot why they existed. And if that sounds familiar, congratulations. The system worked. Rome loved offices. Offices to manage provinces. Offices to manage other offices. Offices whose sole purpose was to check whether another office had filled out the correct forms in triplicate. Efficiency was optional. Procedure was mandatory. If you wanted something done in Rome, you did not simply ask. You petitioned. Then you waited. Then someone reviewed your request. Then someone reviewed the review. Then someone decided the paperwork was missing a seal. Then you started again. Rome understood that power is not just about control, it is about delay. Bureaucracy created distance between the problem and the solution. And distance, Rome discovered, prevents anger from becoming action. When people are busy navigating forms, rules, and offices, they are too tired to revolt. You might be frustrated, but at least you are occupied. This system spread everywhere. Taxes, legal disputes, military logistics, citizenship requests. Everything passed through layers of officials whose authority came not from solving problems, but from processing them. If nothing got fixed, that was unfortunate. The system, however, functioned beautifully. Fast forward to modern life, and the inheritance is painfully obvious. You submit forms. You wait. You call departments that redirect you to other departments that insist you should have contacted the first one. Nobody is evil. Nobody is helpful. Everyone is following procedure. And the most Roman feature of all? No one takes responsibility. In Roman bureaucracy, responsibility dissolved as it moved upward. Each official did their part. If the outcome was disastrous, it was not anyone's fault. It was the process. Modern bureaucracy operates exactly the same way. Problems are never solved. They are handled. The genius of Roman bureaucracy was not that it organized an empire. It was that it trained people to accept inefficiency as normal. Waiting became part of life. Frustration became background noise. Complaining became pointless. So the next time you spend an afternoon accomplishing absolutely nothing while following official procedures, remember, you are not failing. You are honoring a Roman tradition designed to keep systems intact and people tired. And once again, it is working exactly as intended. Ancient Rome loved titles the way modern people love job descriptions that sound important, but explain nothing. Senator, consul, praetor, tribune. Each title came with robes, privileges, and an unspoken agreement that whatever this person said should probably be taken seriously, even if no one was entirely sure why. In Roman society, titles were not just labels, they were shortcuts. You didn't need to prove competence if you had the right title. The title itself was the proof. If a man was called consul, then clearly he knew what he was doing. Or at least Rome agreed to pretend he did. This mindset solved a major problem for the empire. With millions of people spread across vast territories, Rome needed instant authority. Titles allowed citizens to obey without thinking too hard. You didn't argue with a title. You deferred to it. The logic was simple. Hierarchy saves time. 2,000 years later, we never questioned this logic. We just updated the vocabulary. Manager, director, senior advisor, executive officer, lead consultant. Titles that immediately command respect, even when the actual job description is foggy at best. We nod in meetings, take notes, and assume competence, not because we've seen results, but because the title says we should. And the truly Roman part? Questioning titles is still considered rude. In Roman times, openly challenging someone of higher rank was seen as disruptive, disrespectful, and potentially career-ending. Today, questioning authority in professional settings is often labelled unprofessional, difficult, or not a team player. Same rule. New costumes. Titles also create a comforting illusion of order. If everyone has a place in the hierarchy, then the world feels stable, even if the people at the top are improvising wildly. Rome understood that people prefer predictable authority over uncertain freedom. Of course, this system had flaws. Roman history is full of incompetent officials, corrupt governors, and titled men making catastrophic decisions with confidence. But the system itself survived. Because once society agrees that titles equal authority, the system no longer needs to be effective. It only needs to look official. So the next time you feel compelled to respect someone purely because their email signature is longer than a short poem, remember, you are not being polite. You are participating in a Roman tradition designed to replace judgment with hierarchy. And just like Rome, we are still pretending it makes sense. Ancient Rome believed clothing was not about comfort, practicality, or personal expression. Clothing was about rank. What you wore told everyone exactly where you stood in society, and more importantly, where you did not belong. Dress codes were not suggestions. They were social law. The toga is the best example. It was heavy, awkward, difficult to wear correctly, and wildly impractical for daily life, which is exactly why it mattered. Only Roman male citizens could wear it. Foreigners could not. Slaves absolutely could not. Women wore different garments entirely. The toga existed less as clothing and more as a walking sign that said, "I have legal rights." Wearing the wrong clothing in the wrong place could get you fined, mocked, or quietly escorted away by someone with authority and very little patience. The message was clear. If you did not look correct, you did not belong. Rome understood that appearance enforces hierarchy faster than any speech. Fast forward 2,000 years, and we are still doing this, just with better tailoring and less draping fabric. Modern dress codes rarely have clear logic. You must dress professionally, which usually means uncomfortable shoes, restrictive clothing, and colours that express absolutely nothing about your personality. Offices insist on formal wear, even when the job involves sitting still and typing. Courtrooms expect specific attire not because it affects justice, but because it looks serious, and the Roman logic remains intact. Dressing correctly signals respect for the system. Dressing incorrectly suggests rebellion, incompetence, or poor character, none of which have anything to do with your actual ability. What makes this even more Roman is how vague the rules are. Rome never wrote down exactly how to wear a toga correctly either. You were simply expected to know. Modern dress codes work the same way. Break them accidentally, and everyone suddenly remembers the rules very clearly. The system survives because people enforce it on each other. No guards needed. Just side eyes, whispers, and passive-aggressive comments about appropriate attire. So every time you put on clothing you dislike because a situation demands it, remember, you are not being professional. You are honouring a Roman tradition designed to signal hierarchy, obedience, and belonging, all without saying a word. Rome would be proud. Ancient Rome believed deeply in one sacred principle. The system is never wrong. People, situations, reality itself, all of these could fail. But the system? Untouchable. If something went wrong, it wasn't because the system was broken. It was because you misunderstood it. misused it, or simply deserved the outcome. This belief was incredibly useful for running an empire. Roman law was complex, rigid, and often cruel. Appeals took time. Errors were common. Injustice was frequent. But questioning the system itself was dangerous. You could complain about individuals. You could beg officials. You could write petitions. What you could not do was suggest that the structure might be flawed. That crossed from inconvenience into rebellion. And somehow, we inherited this mindset perfectly. Today, when a system fails you, when paperwork disappears, deadlines contradict each other, or procedures make no sense, the expectation is still the same. Accept it politely. You may feel frustrated, but expressing that frustration too strongly makes you the problem. That's just how the process works, remains one of the most Roman sentences ever spoken. The beauty of this rule is how efficiently it shifts responsibility. If the system denies you something unfairly, it is not unjust. It is procedural. If you suffer because of it, that is unfortunate, but technically correct. And technically correct, as Rome would have said, is the best kind of correct. Romans trained their citizens to internalize failure. If a form was rejected, you filled it out again. If a decision made no sense, you accepted it. Persistence was allowed. Resistance was not. This created obedient populations who blamed themselves instead of institutions. Modern systems operate exactly the same way. You follow instructions that contradict each other. You repeat steps you already completed. You explain your situation to 5 different people who cannot help you. And at the end, you are told the outcome is final. Not because it is fair, but because it is official. And the most Roman part? You are expected to be grateful for the opportunity to participate. So the next time a system wastes your time, energy, or patience, remember, you are not unlucky. You are honoring a Roman tradition designed to protect systems from accountability, and it is still undefeated. Ancient Rome loved efficiency, and nothing corrected behavior faster than embarrassment. If you wanted people to obey rules, pay taxes, or stop doing something inconvenient, you did not quietly scold them in private. You shamed them, publicly, enthusiastically, preferably in front of a large crowd with opinions. Roman trials were not discreet affairs. They were performances. Accusations were spoken aloud. Punishments were visible. Mistakes were remembered. Shame was not a side effect of justice. It was the justice. The goal was never just to punish the individual. The goal was to make everyone watching think, I would very much like to avoid being that person. This worked beautifully. Rome understood that fear fades, but embarrassment lingers. You can survive a fine. You can recover from punishment. But being publicly labelled incompetent, immoral, or untrustworthy, that sticks. That reshapes behaviour permanently. And somehow, we never stopped doing this. Modern society claims to value privacy, empathy, and growth. But the instinct to shame remains intact. We still believe that exposing mistakes publicly will fix problems. Only now, instead of the forum, we have social media. Instead of stone steps, we have comment sections. Instead of magistrates, we have strangers with usernames and strong opinions. The structure is identical. Someone violates a norm. Their mistake is amplified. A crowd gathers. Judgment spreads faster than understanding. The lesson is delivered not through correction but humiliation. And once again, the goal is not education. It is deterrence. The most Roman part is how normalized this feels. When someone is publicly shamed today, many people justify it by saying, they deserve it. That sentence would have fit perfectly in a Roman courtroom. Context rarely matters. Proportionality rarely matters. What matters is that the spectacle reinforces the rules. Rome also understood something darker. Public shaming creates compliance without resistance. People internalize fear of embarrassment and self-police their behavior. No guards required, no laws enforced, just the quiet pressure of social observation. And yes, sometimes public accountability is necessary. But Rome did not care about nuance. Shame was applied broadly, generously, and often without mercy. The system did not aim to improve people, it aimed to control them. So when modern society rushes to publicly shame rather than privately resolve, remember, this is not progress. It is Rome, just with better lighting and worse comments. Ancient Rome had a very simple formula for determining who should be listened to, whoever had managed to stay alive the longest without being stabbed. Age in Roman society was not just a number, it was proof. Proof of experience, survival, and presumed wisdom, whether or not any actual wisdom was present. This belief shaped Roman politics, law, and daily life. The Senate itself was built on the idea that older men were inherently more capable of governing, not because they had better ideas, but because they had been around long enough to collect opinions, allies, grudges, and an impressive tolerance for boredom. Youth, meanwhile, was seen as reckless, emotional, and suspiciously energetic. Rome did not ask whether an elder was wise. It assumed wisdom as a side effect of aging, like wrinkles or joint pain. And we kept this rule almost perfectly intact. Modern society still equates age with authority. Seniority matters. Years served outweigh ideas offered. In many workplaces, the longest-standing employee automatically receives respect, even if their main contribution is reminding everyone how things were done back when this system made sense. Questioning older authority figures is still treated as disrespectful rather than analytical. Offering new ideas can be labelled naive. Suggesting change is often met with a Roman classic. That's not how we do things, which is a sentence that has survived longer than the empire itself. Rome loved tradition because tradition did not argue back. Older individuals became living symbols of stability, even when they actively resisted progress. This made systems predictable. Predictability, Rome believed, was safer than improvement. The irony is that Rome was also filled with young people doing the actual work. Soldiers, labourers, clerks, builders, messengers. The empire ran on youth, but listened to age. That imbalance caused stagnation more often than success, yet the rule survived. Today we repeat the same pattern. Younger generations adapt faster, innovate faster, and respond faster to change, but authority often remains locked behind age thresholds. Not because age guarantees wisdom, but because tradition says it should. And the most Roman part? When older systems fail, blame rarely flows upward. Instead, younger people are told they lack patience, discipline, or respect. So the next time someone dismisses an idea simply because it came from someone too young, remember, this rule has nothing to do with wisdom. It has everything to do with Rome deciding long ago that age feels safer than change. And once again, we never bothered to update the rule. Ancient Rome believed laws were sacred. Unfortunately, they also believed laws should be written in a way that made ordinary people feel slightly unwell when reading them. Roman legal language was dense, formal, repetitive, and intentionally intimidating. This was not an accident. Confusion was a feature, not a flaw. Roman laws were written by elites, for elites, and interpreted by professionals who had spent years learning how to untangle sentences that refused to end. If you understood the law, congratulations, you were powerful. If you did not, congratulations, you were normal. The average Roman citizen did not read legal texts. They listened to them being read aloud, nodded politely, and hoped the outcome would not be terrible. The complexity created dependence. If the law was hard to understand, you needed experts. If you needed experts, the system stayed firmly in control. And once again, we preserved this tradition with remarkable dedication. Modern legal language still sounds like it was written by someone actively trying to avoid clarity. Sentences stretch across entire paragraphs. Simple ideas are buried under layers of formal phrasing. Words that no one uses in daily life suddenly appear and demand respect. Ask yourself honestly, have you ever read a legal document and felt calm afterward? Or did you finish it with a vague sense of dread and the suspicion that you accidentally agreed to something irreversible? This is Roman law doing exactly what it was designed to do. Legal complexity creates authority. If a document feels serious enough, people assume it must be correct. Questioning it feels risky. Arguing against it feels irresponsible. Rome understood that clarity invites debate, but confusion encourages compliance. The most Roman part is how society defends this system. When someone says they do not understand a legal document, the response is rarely sympathy. It is usually, "You should have read it more carefully," as if the problem is literacy, not design. Even lawyers acknowledge this quietly. Legal language protects institutions first, individuals second. That principle has not changed in 2,000 years. So when you struggle through a document that seems deliberately hostile to comprehension, remember, you are not stupid. You are experiencing a Roman tradition meant to remind you that power speaks in a language you are not expected to question. And somehow, we still call this progress. Ancient Rome loved big buildings, not because they were always necessary, not because they were efficient, but because they were impressive, overwhelming, and slightly unsettling. Rome understood something fundamental about power. If a building makes you feel small, the institution inside it feels important. Courthouses, basilicas, temples, forums. They were massive on purpose. High ceilings, endless columns, stone everywhere. You were supposed to walk in, look around, and immediately think, "I should behave myself here." Architecture was not decoration. It was psychology. If you entered a Roman government building, the space reminded you who was in charge before anyone said a word. The size alone communicated authority. You did not argue loudly in these places. You did not feel confident. You waited quietly and hoped your business concluded quickly. And once again, we copied this rule almost perfectly. Modern government buildings still favour scale over comfort. Wide steps, tall facades, echoing halls, furniture that feels slightly hostile to human backs. Even corporate headquarters follow the same logic. Glass towers, endless lobbies, security desks that look like altars to bureaucracy. None of this is accidental. Big buildings signal permanence. They suggest power that will outlast you. When something looks ancient, solid, and immovable, people are less likely to question it. Rome understood that authority feels more legitimate when it is surrounded by stone. What makes this especially Roman is how uncomfortable these spaces often are. Waiting rooms feel cold, offices feel distant, seating feels temporary. You are not meant to settle in. You are meant to feel like a visitor in someone else's domain. And it works. People behave differently in imposing spaces. They speak softer. They move carefully. They accept decisions they might question elsewhere. Rome turned architecture into a silent enforcer, and we still let it do the same job today. The irony is that many of these buildings house systems that could operate perfectly well in smaller, friendlier spaces. But friendliness does not command obedience. Size does. So the next time you walk into a massive official building and feel inexplicably tense, remember, this sensation is not accidental. It is a Roman tradition designed to make authority feel inevitable. And it has been working for over 2,000 years. Ancient Rome believed work was not just something you did to survive, it was a moral statement. To be busy was to be virtuous. To rest too much was suspicious. Idleness, in Roman eyes, was not relaxation. It was a warning sign that you might start thinking dangerous thoughts. This belief made perfect sense for an empire built on conquest, agriculture, and unpaid labour. Rome needed people moving, producing, obeying schedules, and staying exhausted enough to avoid questioning the system. Work kept citizens useful and distracted. Rest created space for reflection, and reflection had a habit of turning into criticism. So Romans praised hard work loudly and constantly. Philosophers wrote about duty. Politicians glorified labour. Citizens were expected to fill their days with tasks, responsibilities, and obligations. Leisure was allowed, but only in controlled forms: baths, games, festivals, all carefully structured and socially acceptable. Doing nothing, however, was deeply frowned upon, and somehow this idea survived intact. Today, work is still treated as a measure of personal worth. Being busy earns praise. Being tired earns respect. Admitting you are resting invites judgment. People brag about long hours the way Romans once bragged about military service. Productivity has replaced virtue, but the moral weight remains the same. The most Roman part of all is the guilt. When you are not working, you often feel like you should be, even when there is nothing urgent to do, even when rest would clearly improve your health. That quiet discomfort is Rome whispering across centuries that your value depends on your output. Rome did not invent hard work, but it did invent the idea that constant labour makes you a better person. And once society accepts that belief, people begin policing themselves. No overseer needed, no chains required, just internalized pressure. The irony is that Rome itself depended on massive amounts of leisure. For the wealthy, senators debated philosophy. Elites enjoyed long dinners and extended vacations. Meanwhile, everyone else absorbed the moral duty to stay productive. The rule applied unevenly, but it applied strongly. Modern society follows the same pattern. Rest is permitted, but only after productivity. Only when earned. Only when justified. So the next time you feel uneasy for doing absolutely nothing, remember, this guilt is not natural. It is Roman, and it has been controlling behaviour for a very long time. Ancient Rome loved one thing almost as much as order, knowing exactly where everyone stood. Roman society was layered like a very unforgiving cake. Senators at the top, equestrians below them, citizens below that, freedmen somewhere in between, slaves at the bottom. Everyone had a place, and Rome was extremely clear that staying in your place was a civic duty. This hierarchy was not subtle. It shaped where you lived, what you wore, who you could marry, how loudly you were allowed to speak, and whether your opinion mattered at all. Questioning the hierarchy was not considered bravery. It was considered confusion. Rome did not waste time pretending this system was fair. It was stable. And stability, Rome believed, mattered more than justice. A rigid hierarchy reduced friction. People knew who to obey, who to ignore, and who to blame when something went wrong. And somehow, we kept this rule almost perfectly intact. Modern society insists it is equal, open, and flexible, but quietly maintains layers everywhere. Job titles, income brackets, education levels, social circles, online status. None of these hierarchies are officially declared, but everyone instinctively understands them. You feel them the moment you enter a room. The most Roman part is how uncomfortable people become when these hierarchies are questioned. Pointing out inequality is often treated as more disruptive than the inequality itself. Suggesting that rank should not determine respect is seen as naive. Rome would have appreciated that efficiency. Rome also taught us to internalize hierarchy. People police themselves. They hesitate to speak. They second-guess whether they are qualified to contribute. They assume silence is safer than challenge. This is not humility, it is training. Even today, success often depends less on talent and more on navigating invisible ladders, knowing when to speak, knowing when to stay quiet, knowing who matters, knowing who does not. Rome did not invent this instinct, but it perfected it. And here is the quiet truth Rome never advertised. Hierarchies persist because they feel natural once people stop questioning them. They become background structure. Like gravity, you notice them only when you fall. So the next time you feel like you are not supposed to speak up, question a rule or challenge a decision, remember, that hesitation did not come from logic. It came from Rome. And it is still very good at keeping people in line. Ancient Rome loved manners, not because Romans were especially kind, warm, or considerate, but because politeness was a form of control. Proper greetings, formal gestures, and carefully scripted phrases helped keep social order intact. If everyone followed the ritual, no one had to say what they actually thought. Romans were extremely particular about how you greeted someone. Who spoke first mattered. How you addressed them mattered. Which titles you used mattered. Even body language was regulated. A greeting was not just a courtesy. It was a public acknowledgement of hierarchy. You did not simply say hello. You performed respect. This made social interactions predictable, safe, exhausting. And somehow we kept this system almost unchanged. Today, you still say phrases you do not mean. How are you? When you do not want an answer. Nice to meet you, when you already forgot the person's name. With all due respect, when you are about to offer none. These phrases function exactly like Roman greetings. They smooth interactions without requiring honesty. The Roman genius was realizing that politeness rituals reduce conflict by avoiding sincerity. If everyone sticks to the script, no one has to risk discomfort. Feelings stay buried. Power stays unchallenged. Conversations remain shallow enough to manage. What makes this especially Roman is how uncomfortable people become when the ritual is broken. Answer, "How are you?" honestly, and the room freezes. Skip a greeting and suddenly you are rude. Speak too directly, and you are labelled difficult. The system punishes authenticity not because it is wrong, but because it disrupts the performance. Rome trained people to value appearance over intention. Respect was shown through form, not action. Saying the right words mattered more than doing the right thing. This belief carried forward beautifully into modern professional culture, where tone often matters more than truth. And of course, politeness rituals reinforce hierarchy. You speak differently to superiors than to equals. You soften language upward and sharpen it downward. Rome would have applauded the efficiency. So the next time you find yourself smiling, nodding and exchanging pleasant phrases while thinking something entirely different, remember, this is not social grace. It is a Roman communication system designed to keep interactions controlled, emotions muted, and power comfortably unexamined. And you perform it every day without realizing it. Ancient Rome believed authority was not something you merely had, it was something you performed. Power needed a costume, a posture, and a facial expression that suggested absolutely no jokes would be tolerated. If authority looked relaxed, Rome assumed it would be challenged. So authority was trained to look severe, distant, and permanently disappointed. Roman officials wore specific garments, sat in elevated chairs, and spoke in rigid formal language. Smiling too much was suspicious. Laughing at the wrong moment was dangerous. The message was clear. If you appear approachable, people might forget to fear you. And fear, Rome believed, was far more reliable than affection. This rule survived beautifully. Today, authority still wears seriousness like armor. Judges, executives, officials, and leaders are expected to look composed, controlled, and emotionally restrained. Too much warmth reads as weakness. Too much humor reads as incompetence. A serious face suggests competence even when none is present. The most Roman part of this tradition is how quickly people lose trust in leaders who appear human. Show uncertainty, and confidence drops. Show emotion, and respect fades. Smile too often, and suddenly you are not professional. Rome trained society to associate gravity with credibility, and we never unlearned it. Even language reflects this. Official speech is stiff, formal, and heavy with unnecessary complexity. Simple explanations sound unofficial. Casual language sounds risky. Rome understood that complexity creates distance, and distance creates authority. Architecture reinforces this rule as well. Authority figures are elevated, physically separated, or placed behind desks, podiums, and barriers. These are not practical choices. They are psychological ones. Rome taught us that power must feel inaccessible to remain powerful. And perhaps the strangest part is how willingly people accept this performance. We feel comforted when authority looks stern. We assume seriousness equals competence. When leaders joke, relax, or admit uncertainty, discomfort spreads through the room. Rome did not want leaders to be relatable. It wanted them to be unquestionable. So the next time you feel uneasy around someone simply because they look official, speak formally, or never smile, remember, this reaction is not instinct. It is Roman conditioning. Authority is not required to be kind, effective, or wise, only serious. And that illusion is still doing most of the work. This is ancient Rome's greatest achievement. Not aqueducts, not roads, not concrete. This. The rule that survives everything. We do it this way because it has always been done this way. Rome ran on tradition. When asked why a rule existed, the answer was rarely logical. It was historical. Because our ancestors did it. Because it worked before. Because changing it would feel uncomfortable. Tradition was treated like evidence. Age became proof. And that mindset outlived the empire. Today, countless rules govern your life without justification. Procedures no one remembers the origin of. Customs that survive audits, reforms, and common sense. Meetings that exist because meetings once existed. Forms that ask for information already provided elsewhere. Rules defended not with reason, but with the phrase, "That's just the way it works," which is Roman shorthand for, "Do not ask questions." Rome understood something deeply unsettling. If a rule lasts long enough, people stop questioning it. They stop asking who benefits. They stop imagining alternatives. Tradition becomes invisible, and invisible rules are the strongest kind. This is why systems often feel ancient, even when they are modern. You can remove emperors, senators, togas, and Latin, but if you keep the mindset, the structure remains. People obey not because they are forced to, but because deviation feels wrong. The most Roman part is how resistance is framed. Anyone who questions tradition is labelled disruptive, unrealistic, or difficult. Rome loved stability. Stability required silence. Change invited chaos. And chaos, Rome believed, was worse than inefficiency. So rules accumulate, layer upon layer. Nobody removes them because nobody remembers adding them. Over time, systems become museums of outdated logic, still operating long after their original purpose vanished. And yet, people follow them, faithfully, quietly, automatically. That is Rome's real legacy. Not domination by force, but domination by habit. So when you follow a rule you cannot explain, obey a procedure that makes no sense, or accept a custom simply because everyone else does, remember, you are not being practical. You are participating in a Roman tradition so successful it no longer needs justification. And somewhere, in the ruins of the Forum, tradition smiles, because it won again. Nefertiti enters history not as a child, not as a princess in training, but as a fully realized presence, already powerful, already visible, already astonishing. Unlike most figures of Egypt's royal line, her beginnings are almost completely hidden. No childhood scenes carved into temple walls. No clear genealogy tracing her bloodline back through noble houses. She steps into the record suddenly, like a figure emerging from desert heat, leaving historians to argue over where she came from and who she truly was before she became queen. Her name itself offers the first clue, and the first mystery. Nefertiti means the beautiful one has come, a phrase that sounds less like a birth name and more like an announcement. It suggests arrival, transformation, even destiny. Some scholars have proposed that she was foreign-born, perhaps from the Mitanni kingdom to the north, sent to Egypt as part of a diplomatic marriage. Others argue she was Egyptian, possibly related to powerful court officials, raised close enough to the throne to understand its rituals, language, and dangers. No theory has ever been proven beyond doubt. What makes this silence so striking is how quickly it ends. Once Nefertiti appears beside the future pharaoh Akhenaten, she is everywhere. She is not a background wife, not a decorative consort. From the earliest reliefs, she stands tall, equal in scale to the king, participating in ceremonies traditionally reserved for pharaohs alone. This sudden prominence suggests that whatever her origins were, she arrived at court already prepared for power. Egyptian queens before her had influence, but usually behind the scenes. Nefertiti is different. She is visible, named, celebrated. Artists carve her likeness again and again, refining her features with obsessive care. High cheekbones, elegant neck, calm, unreadable eyes. Beauty in her case is not softness, it is authority rendered in human form. The absence of her early life has only amplified her legend. With no childhood to anchor her, Nefertiti becomes timeless, almost symbolic. She is not remembered for where she came from, but for how completely she transformed the role of queen once she arrived. From the moment she steps into the historical record, she is no longer becoming something. She already is something, and Egypt will soon begin to change around her. When Nefertiti becomes queen, she does so beside one of the most radical rulers Egypt would ever know, Akhenaten. Born Amenhotep IV, her husband would soon abandon centuries of tradition and drag the entire kingdom into a spiritual experiment that shocked priests, nobles, and common people alike. And Nefertiti was not merely present for this upheaval. She stood at its very center. From the earliest years of Akhenaten's reign, Nefertiti appears beside him in official art with unprecedented prominence. She is shown wearing the tall blue crown, a symbol usually reserved for kings. She performs ritual offerings directly to the sun god Aten. In some reliefs, she even smites enemies, a pose almost exclusively associated with pharaohs. This is not symbolic flattery. In ancient Egypt, imagery was power. To be carved this way was to be this way. Together, Akhenaten and Nefertiti dismantle Egypt's traditional religious order. The old gods, Amun, Osiris, Isis, are sidelined or erased. Temples are closed, priesthoods stripped of influence. In their place rises Aten, the visible sun disk, whose rays end in tiny hands offering life. This shift is not subtle. It is loud, aggressive, and deeply unsettling to a society built on cosmic balance and ancestral tradition. Nefertiti's role in this revolution is unmistakable. She is consistently depicted as Akhenaten's equal partner, not his subordinate. While previous queens supported cults quietly, Nefertiti embodies this new faith publicly. She and the king appear together in intimate family scenes beneath Aten's rays, presenting themselves as the sole intermediaries between God and people. Power flows through them alone. This partnership suggests something extraordinary. Nefertiti is not just a queen supporting her husband's vision, she is a co-architect of it. Her intelligence, charisma, and commanding presence help legitimize a religious shift that would otherwise seem reckless. If Akhenaten is the visionary, Nefertiti is the stabilizing force, the face that makes the revolution palatable. Yet this closeness carries danger. By tying her identity so tightly to Akhenaten's heresy, Nefertiti binds her fate to a fragile experiment. If the revolution fails, she will not be remembered as a passive consort, but as a central figure in Egypt's greatest religious gamble. And as the court relocates to a brand new capital in the desert, the stakes, political, spiritual, and personal, begin to rise rapidly. The religious revolution championed by Nefertiti and Akhenaten does not remain confined to temples and rituals. It reshapes the very landscape of Egypt. In a dramatic act of defiance against tradition, the royal couple abandons the old capitals and orders the construction of an entirely new city, Amarna. Rising from an empty stretch of desert, the city is meant to be a physical manifestation of their new faith, pure, untainted, and devoted solely to the sun disk Aten. For Nefertiti, Amarna becomes both a stage and a test. Here, freed from the weight of ancient priesthoods and entrenched elites, she appears more powerful than ever. Reliefs from the city show her in intimate domestic scenes, riding chariots, kissing her daughters, and worshipping beneath the open sky. The art style itself changes. Figures are elongated, expressive, almost fragile. Royal life is no longer distant and eternal. It is personal, human, and exposed to light. Nefertiti thrives in this environment. She is not hidden behind palace walls. She is visible in public ceremonies, wearing elaborate crowns and robes, her presence radiating authority. Unlike earlier queens who operated quietly, Nefertiti's power is on display. The city's layout reinforces this. Temples have no roofs, allowing sunlight to flood every ritual space. There are no dark sanctuaries, no secrets. Everything, like the queen herself, exists under constant illumination. But Amana is also fragile. It has no deep roots, no ancestral graves, no centuries of tradition to stabilize it. The people who move there do so out of obligation, not devotion. Many priests resent the loss of their gods. Officials whisper doubts. Foreign powers watch closely, sensing weakness in a kingdom distracted by theology. Within this tension, Nefertiti's role grows more complex. She appears not only as a religious figure, but as a symbol of continuity. Her calm, controlled image contrasts sharply with the anxiety beneath the surface of the new capital. If Akhenaten's vision feels radical and unsettling, Nefertiti's presence reassures, at least visually, that order still exists. Yet the city of the sun is unforgiving. It allows no shadows and no place to hide failure. As the years pass, cracks begin to show, diplomatic neglect, unrest at home, and an increasingly isolated royal family. Amana, once a bold declaration of divine truth, starts to resemble something else entirely. A beautiful experiment balanced dangerously on the edge of collapse. As the years in the city of the sun pass, Nefertiti's image evolves from powerful queen to something far more symbolic. She becomes not only a ruler and religious figure, but a carefully constructed embodiment of the new cosmic order. In Amana art, she is no longer simply beside the king. She is central, sometimes even dominant, shown performing rituals alone, receiving divine rays directly, or standing at the center of family compositions beneath the sun. Motherhood plays a critical role in this transformation. Nefertiti bears 6 daughters, and they appear constantly in royal imagery. The family is shown touching, laughing, mourning, and worshipping together. This intimacy is unprecedented in Egyptian royal art, which traditionally emphasized distance and eternal perfection. Here, Nefertiti is not a remote goddess. She is visibly human, yet elevated. Her fertility, devotion, and composure merge into a single message. She is the living proof that a ten's order brings harmony and life. At the same time, her visual presence becomes increasingly idealized. Artists refine her face to near perfection, smoothing away age, exhaustion, and doubt. The famous bust, created in this period, captures this duality perfectly, serene and flawless, yet unsettlingly calm. It is not a portrait of a woman at rest, but of an icon carefully shaped for eternity. Nefertiti's beauty is no longer personal. It is political. This elevation carries a heavy cost. To be depicted as a living conduit of divine order means losing the protection of anonymity. Any failure of the new religion, any misfortune suffered by Egypt, reflects directly on her. As crops struggle and foreign territories slip from Egyptian control, whispers begin to circulate. The sun god promises balance and prosperity, but reality feels increasingly unstable. Within the palace, grief also leaves its mark. One of Nefertiti's daughters dies young, an event immortalized in raw, emotional reliefs. The royal couple is shown mourning openly, their bodies bent in sorrow beneath Aten's indifferent rays. It is a rare admission that even divine rulers are not spared loss. By this stage, Nefertiti exists in a precarious space between woman and symbol. She is expected to reassure a nervous kingdom, embody divine favor, and remain flawless, all while the foundations beneath her world begin to erode. The more godlike her image becomes, the less room there is for error, and Egypt, quietly but relentlessly, is running out of patience. Then, almost without warning, Nefertiti begins to vanish. After years of constant visibility, her name and image abruptly fade from the historical record. Reliefs that once celebrated her presence fall silent. Inscriptions that carefully listed her titles stop mentioning her altogether. For a woman who had stood at the very center of Egypt's religious and political life, this disappearance is startling and deeply unsettling. Scholars have long debated what this silence means. One possibility is death. Disease was common in Amarna, and several members of the royal family are known to have died young. If Nefertiti died suddenly, the lack of a grand burial or official mourning would be unusual, but not impossible in a period already marked by instability. Yet no tomb, no mummy, no clear funerary inscription has ever been securely identified as hers. Another theory is far more provocative, that Nefertiti did not die at all, but transformed. Some evidence suggests she may have taken on a new identity late in Akhenaten's reign, possibly ruling alongside him, or even briefly as a pharaoh in her own right under a different name. This would explain her disappearance as queen, and the sudden appearance of a new ruler whose identity remains frustratingly unclear. If true, it would mean Nefertiti did not fall from power, but ascended beyond the role she had already redefined. There is also a darker possibility. As the Aten experiment faltered, blame had to fall somewhere. The radical religion had disrupted Egypt's balance, weakened its international standing, and angered powerful priesthoods. Nefertiti, as the most visible symbol of this revolution, may have been deliberately erased. In ancient Egypt, removal from records was a form of punishment more severe than death. To be forgotten was to be destroyed in the afterlife. What makes this chapter so haunting is the absence of certainty. Nefertiti does not exit history with drama or explanation. She dissolves into silence, leaving behind fragments, half-finished reliefs, and unanswered questions. For a culture obsessed with permanence, this erasure is deeply unnatural. Whether she died, ruled in secret, or was deliberately removed, Nefertiti's disappearance marks a turning point. The light that once bathed Amarna begins to dim, and with the queen gone, or hidden, Egypt's bold experiment starts to unravel, preparing the ground for a rapid and ruthless return to the old gods. With Nefertiti absent from the stage, the fragile world she helped build begins to collapse with alarming speed. Akhenaten's authority weakens, and the once confident vision of a ten-centered rule loses its grip on Egypt. The court at Amarna grows tense and uncertain. Officials who once praised the sun god now hedge their loyalties, sensing that the old order is waiting patiently to reclaim power. When Akhenaten dies, the revolution effectively dies with him. His successors move quickly to distance themselves from his legacy. The new king, the young Tutankhamun, abandons Amarna and restores the worship of the traditional gods. Temples to Amun are reopened. Priests regain their wealth and influence. The name of Aten is quietly pushed aside, treated less like divine truth and more like a dangerous mistake. In this political cleanup, memory itself becomes a battlefield. Akhenaten's name is chiseled from monuments, his statues are smashed or repurposed, and Nefertiti, once the radiant face of the new order, receives no official rehabilitation. Her legacy is neither openly condemned nor honoured. Instead, it is left unresolved, suspended in historical limbo. This silence is telling. Egypt was skilled at rewriting its past, but it usually did so decisively. Villains were erased. Heroes were glorified. Nefertiti fits neither category neatly. To condemn her outright would require acknowledging her immense authority. To praise her would mean admitting the revolution had once been legitimate. So she is left in shadow, neither restored nor destroyed. Amarna itself is abandoned almost overnight. Palaces crumble, temples fall silent, and the desert reclaims the city. What was once the spiritual centre of Egypt becomes a cautionary ruin. The people return to familiar rhythms, familiar gods, familiar certainties. Balance, or mat, is restored, but at the cost of forgetting one of the most extraordinary women ever to sit on Egypt's throne. Yet forgetting is never complete. Even as official memory erases her, fragments remain. Shattered reliefs, unfinished inscriptions, and rumours preserved by later generations of scribes. Nefertiti becomes a ghost in Egypt's historical consciousness. A reminder that, for a brief and dangerous moment, a queen stood almost equal to the gods and helped reshape the soul of an empire. Her absence after the revolution does not diminish her importance. If anything, it magnifies it. For only someone truly powerful could be so carefully, so quietly, left unresolved. Centuries pass, dynasties rise and fall, and Nefertiti remains buried in silence until her image returns with astonishing force. Unlike many forgotten queens, she is not resurrected through grand inscriptions or heroic chronicles, but through a single object, a sculpted face so striking that it reshapes her legacy overnight. Long after her name fades from memory, her likeness survives, intact, calm, and impossibly modern. The sculpture does something no text ever could. It restores individuality. Gone is the abstraction of titles and rituals. What remains is a woman rendered with precision and restraint. The elongated neck, the poised jawline, the eyes that seem alert yet distant. This is not the exaggerated symbolism of royal propaganda. It feels intimate, almost personal, as if the artist captured a moment when the queen allowed her public mask to settle naturally into place. What makes this survival so remarkable is contrast. The regime she helped build was deliberately dismantled. Its monuments were smashed, its theology condemned, its leaders erased. Yet this face escapes destruction. It suggests that even in an era of systematic forgetting, someone chose preservation over annihilation. Whether by accident or intent, Nefertiti's image slips through the cracks of history's purge. As generations encounter this likeness, Nefertiti is reborn in a new form, not as a political figure, but as an ideal. She becomes shorthand for elegance, mystery, and restrained power. Unlike other rulers remembered for conquest or cruelty, she is remembered for presence. The calm authority of her expression invites interpretation rather than commands obedience. This rebirth also reshapes how her life is understood. The face forces historians and viewers alike to reconsider her role. A woman capable of inspiring such refined artistry could not have been a passive participant in history. The sculpture implies intelligence, control, and self-awareness, qualities that align with her unusual prominence during one of Egypt's most turbulent eras. Ironically, the very thing that once endangered her, visibility, now preserves her. The revolution she helped lead collapses, but her image outlives it. Empires crumble, gods are replaced, cities return to dust. Yet Nefertiti's face remains quietly defiant, refusing to be forgotten. In the end, she achieves what every Egyptian ruler desired but few attained, a form of immortality untouched by politics. Not through monuments or prayers, but through recognition, again and again, by eyes separated from her by thousands of years. With Nefertiti's face returned to the world, a new conflict begins. One not fought with armies or priests, but with claims, laws, and silence. The sculpture's discovery in the early 20th century instantly elevates her from a forgotten queen to a global icon. Yet the object that restores her presence also sharpens the most painful question of all. Where is the rest of her? No confirmed tomb of Nefertiti has ever been found. Unlike other queens, she has no secure burial site, no identified mummy, no funerary texts guiding her soul through the afterlife. For ancient Egyptians, this absence is catastrophic. To be buried properly was not symbolic, it was essential. Without a body, the afterlife was uncertain. Without a tomb, remembrance was fragile. Nefertiti's physical disappearance is not just a historical mystery, it is a spiritual rupture. As Egypt enters the modern era, her image becomes a contested artifact. She is admired, reproduced, commercialized, and argued over. Egypt views her as a stolen daughter, removed during a period of unequal power and foreign control. Museums frame her as a masterpiece of human art, detached from the politics of how she left her homeland. Between these positions lies a deep ethical tension. Can an icon belong to the world if it was taken from its history? This dispute mirrors Nefertiti's own life. She existed at the center of power, yet ultimately lost control over how her legacy was handled. Just as her name was erased by later rulers, Her body seems to have been hidden, moved, or deliberately obscured. Some theories suggest she was buried in secrecy to protect her remains during the religious backlash. Others propose her tomb was repurposed or destroyed. None can be proven. What remains undeniable is imbalance. We have her face, but not her story's ending. We have her image, but not her voice. Modern admiration cannot fill the void left by her missing burial, just as artistic beauty cannot replace historical justice. Nefertiti becomes a symbol of absence itself, a woman known everywhere, yet physically nowhere. Her unfinished story continues to provoke discomfort, because it reminds us that history is often shaped not by what survives, but by what is missing, and by who gets to decide what is kept, displayed, or returned. In this way, Nefertiti's mystery never truly ends. It simply changes hands, passing from ancient priests to modern curators, from royal erasure to global debate, still unresolved, still unsettled. Nefertiti's life closes not with certainty, but with resonance. Unlike rulers whose deaths define their legacy, she remains suspended between presence and absence, power and erasure. This unresolved ending is precisely what grants her endurance. History often remembers conclusions more clearly than beginnings, but in Nefertiti's case, it is the missing final chapter that keeps her alive. She lived at a rare crossroads of beauty, authority, and ideology. As queen, she reshaped the visual language of power. As a public figure, she stood nearly equal to a pharaoh during one of Egypt's most dangerous experiments. As a symbol, she outlived the gods she served and the system she helped build. Even when her name vanished from inscriptions, her impact lingered in the ruins of Amarna, and in the memory of a revolution Egypt tried desperately to forget. What makes Nefertiti extraordinary is not simply that she was influential, but that she was never safely categorized. She was not reduced to wife, mother, saint, or villain. She occupied all these roles at once, and then slipped beyond them. Later rulers could erase her name, but they could not replace the void she left behind. Her silence becomes its own form of power. In modern times, she exists in fragments, a face without a body, a reign without an ending, a queen without a tomb. Each fragment invites projection. To some, she is a feminist icon ahead of her time. To others, a political partner in religious extremism. To many, she is simply mystery made visible. None of these interpretations fully contain her, and that is her final triumph. Ancient Egyptians believed true immortality came through remembrance. Names spoken aloud, images preserved, stories repeated. By that measure, Nefertiti has succeeded beyond any ruler of her age. She is remembered not because history resolved her story, but because it failed to. Her legacy is not a monument or a dynasty. It is a question that refuses to fade. What happened to her? Why was she erased? How much power did she truly hold? Each generation asks again, and in doing so keeps her alive. Nefertiti does not belong solely to the past. She exists in the tension between what we know and what we will never know. And as long as that tension endures, so will she, beautiful, unfinished, and eternally present. Long before the wheel transformed the world, movement itself was one of humanity's greatest obstacles. Early societies lived within the limits of their own strength. If something was too heavy to carry, it was dragged. If it was too far away, it was left behind. Every journey across land demanded time, labour, and cooperation, and even then, distance imposed harsh boundaries on what people could achieve. Heavy materials, stone blocks, timber, grain stores, were constant problems. To move them, people relied on sledges pulled across dirt, sand, or mud, sometimes lubricated with water or animal fat to reduce friction. Others used round logs as rollers, placing them beneath loads and shifting them forward one by one. These methods worked but slowly, and only over short distances. Progress was possible but painfully inefficient. Because of this, geography dictated destiny. Settlements clustered tightly around rivers, coastlines, and fertile plains. Waterways became the primary arteries of trade because floating cargo was far easier than hauling it across land. Boats carried what carts could not yet move. Entire economic systems grew around rivers, while inland travel remained limited and exhausting. This pre-wheel world shaped how civilizations developed. Cities stayed compact. Construction was constrained by what human and animal muscle could manage. Trade networks existed, but they were fragile and local. The idea of moving large quantities of goods regularly over long distances was simply unrealistic. Ambition was tempered by physics. What makes this period so important is not its primitiveness, but its ingenuity under constraint. People constantly searched for ways to reduce effort, smoother paths, better sled designs, stronger harnesses for animals. They understood friction as an enemy, even if they lacked the language to describe it. They were circling the solution without realizing it. The concept of rolling motion did exist in fragments. Logs rolled, stones rolled downhill. Children watched objects move in circles without resistance. But turning that observation into a controlled, repeatable technology required a leap of abstraction. It required seeing motion not as something to fight against, but something to harness. The wheel did not emerge because humans were suddenly smarter. It emerged because pressure made innovation unavoidable. Growing populations, expanding trade, and larger construction projects demanded a new answer to an old problem. Before the wheel, civilization moved, but slowly, cautiously, and always at the mercy of the ground beneath its feet. The wheel did not begin as a vehicle. Its first true revolution happened quietly, indoors, in workshops filled with wet clay and spinning hands. Long before carts or chariots appeared, craftsmen in Mesopotamia discovered that rotation itself could be controlled, and once controlled, it could be transformative. Early potters originally shaped vessels by hand, slowly building walls of clay coil by coil. Every bowl and jar required constant repositioning. The process was labor-intensive and inconsistent. Symmetry was difficult to achieve, and speed was limited by human patience.